Cabello Dlamini woke up already in a bad mood, and the loud crash outside his mansion pushed him over the edge. Rain was still dripping from the night storm, and the powerful winds had bent the huge metal gate that guarded his property. He had an important business meeting waiting for him, and nothing irritated him more than delays. He walked out with sharp, angry steps, prepared to shout at whoever was responsible, but instead of security guards or workers, he found a thin teenage boy crouched at the base of the damaged gate, quietly tightening loose bolts with old, rusty tools that looked like they belonged in a junkyard. Cabello stopped, confused. The boy didn't even notice him at first. His small hands moved quickly, twisting wires, checking hinges, and pushing against the heavy metal as if he had done this 1,000 times. The billionaire's anger slowly shifted into surprise. Who was this child? Why was he touching his gate? And how could someone so young work with such focus under so much pressure? Cabello stepped closer, expecting the boy to get scared or run, but he didn't. He simply wiped his forehead with the back of his hand and kept working, as if a furious billionaire wasn't standing right behind him. For a moment, Cabello forgot about his meeting, forgot about the storm, and forgot he was supposed to be the most feared man in Makarori Heights. His eyes stayed locked on the boy's steady movements. It made no sense. Security guards had failed to fix this gate many times, yet this skinny teenager was making progress using tools that could barely hold together. Cabello felt something he hadn't felt in years: curiosity. He opened his mouth to shout again but found himself speechless. The boy looked up briefly, his calm eyes meeting Cabello's cold stare, then returned to his work without a single word of fear or apology. That moment, something unexpected happened inside Cabello. It wasn't respect. Not yet, but it was the beginning of a strange pull he couldn't explain. There was something different about this boy. Something bold. Something quietly powerful. And for the first time that morning, Cabello wondered if the broken gate wasn't the real interruption. Maybe the real interruption was this young stranger who had appeared from nowhere, working with nothing, yet doing what grown experts couldn't. Tanashi Mafivu was only 15, but life had already taught him lessons many adults never learn. Orphaned at a young age, he survived by fixing scrap metal and earning a few coins here and there. Every day was a struggle, yet he moved with a quiet determination, focused on the work in front of him. That morning, the heavy storm had damaged the grand gate of Cabello Dlamini's mansion, and Tanashi had seen it as just another job. His small hands twisted wires, tightened loose bolts, and nudged heavy hinges with surprising strength, all while balancing on uneven ground slick with rainwater. When Cabello stormed outside, furious at the delay, he expected to see workers scrambling, but instead he saw the skinny boy silently moving with purpose. He shouted, demanding to know why the gate wasn't fixed, but Tanashi didn't flinch. Not a single word came from him, not a single sign of fear or hesitation. He kept working, his focus sharper than any machine, as if the world's richest man and his booming voice didn't even exist. The contrast was striking. Here was a billionaire, used to control and power, facing a child who seemed untouched by either. Cabello's anger slowly melted into fascination. He could not understand why this boy didn't look up and panic, why he didn't run or beg for mercy. Instead, he worked calmly, efficiently, and with such precision that the gate started to move as if by magic. The billionaire's eyes narrowed in disbelief. The tools were old and worn, the materials rough, yet every motion Tanashi made seemed perfectly measured, almost like an artist painting a masterpiece with metal and wire. A strange feeling crept into Cabello's chest: curiosity. Something he hadn't felt in years. Why would he, a man who controlled businesses worth millions, stop and simply watch a poor boy work? There was something magnetic about Tanashi's focus, his resilience, and the quiet strength that came from hardship. Every twist of wire, every push of the gate, told a story of survival, courage, and determination. The billionaire realized that this child, so small and seemingly powerless, held a power of his own, one that no money could buy. And as he watched, a tiny seed of respect, even wonder, began to grow in his heart, leaving him speechless in front of a boy who should have had no place in his world. Tanashi worked with a quiet confidence, his small hands moving quickly over the heavy, bent metal of the gate. The tools he used were nothing more than broken pliers and some thin, rusty wire. Yet each movement was precise, almost magical. He twisted, pushed, and bent the metal with such ease that the massive gate began to straighten and swing smoothly, as if it had a life of its own. The storm had left the gate in a sorry state, but within minutes, Tanashi's skill transformed it back to its strong, sturdy shape. Cabello Dlamini stood frozen, staring, unable to believe his eyes. He had spent thousands hiring experts, engineers, and technicians, and not one of them had ever managed to repair it so quickly. Yet here was a teenage boy doing the impossible, with nothing but determination and simple, worn-out tools. Cabello's surprise quickly turned into curiosity. He stepped closer, examining the boy's work, noticing how every twist of wire and turn of the pliers seemed perfectly planned. "Where did you learn to do this?" he asked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and admiration. Tanashi paused, looking up at him with calm, steady eyes. He didn't boast or hesitate. "I teach myself," he said simply, as if that explained everything. There was no arrogance in his tone, no desire for praise, only honesty and quiet pride in his work. The billionaire's mind raced. This boy had no formal training, no fancy workshops or mentors, yet he had more skill in his fingers than most professionals Cabello had ever met. Each movement showed patience, intelligence, and creativity, qualities that no amount of money could buy. The way Tanashi approached the task, carefully assessing the problem and finding solutions on his own, made Cabello realize something important. True talent often comes from hardship, not privilege. Cabello couldn't take his eyes off the boy. Something about his calm determination was almost hypnotic. The storm, the rain, and even the ruined gate seemed to fade away as he watched Tanashi work. In that moment, Cabello understood that he was witnessing more than just a repair. He was seeing the strength of spirit, the power of self-reliance, and the brilliance of a mind that refused to give up. And for the first time in a long while, Cabello felt both humbled and intrigued, captivated by a boy who had nothing but somehow could do everything. Tanashi looked up from the gate, his hand still holding the worn pliers, and spoke softly, almost as if sharing a secret. He explained that he had left school long ago. His grandmother, Gogo Maruping, had fallen seriously ill, and there was no one else to care for her. Every day since, he had carried the weight of responsibility on his young shoulders. The repairs he did, the scraps he collected, every coin he earned, all went toward buying medicine and providing some comfort for the woman who had raised him. There was no complaint in his voice, no bitterness about the hardships life had forced upon him. Just a quiet, determined honesty that seemed almost too mature for his age. Cabello felt a strange silence settle between them. He had met thousands of people in his life, business partners, employees, even beggars, but none had ever carried such responsibility with such humility. The boy's story was simple, yet the strength behind it was overwhelming. Here was someone who had faced sickness, poverty, and loneliness without ever giving up. Each word Tanashi spoke revealed courage that money could not buy, resilience that even experience sometimes fails to teach, and a heart that thought of others before itself. As Tanashi continued, Cabello noticed how naturally he moved, how nothing in his demeanor suggested self-pity or fear. Every action, every choice, showed a boy who understood the meaning of sacrifice and hard work. It made Cabello uncomfortable in a way he had not felt for years. He was used to power, control, and having the world bend to his will. But here was a young teenager who had no riches, no status, yet held a strength far greater than wealth. The rain still dripped from the damaged gate, the storm clouds lingering above, but Cabello's mind was elsewhere. He could not stop thinking about the sacrifices Tanashi had made, the long days of labor, the nights spent worrying about medicine, the constant struggle just to survive while taking care of someone else. It was a sharp contrast to his own life, filled with luxury, ease, and endless resources. For the first time, he realized that money was not the only measure of power. In that moment, Cabello's pride began to crack. The boy before him, fragile in appearance but strong in spirit, had unknowingly challenged everything Cabello believed about success and strength. Watching Tanashi, he felt a mix of awe, guilt, and an unusual admiration. The teenager had shown him that true courage is silent, true strength is humble, and sometimes the richest people are those who have the least in material wealth, but the most in heart. Cabello Dlamini stood at the entrance of his grand mansion, looking down at Tanashi with a rare softness in his eyes. Without thinking much, he said, "Come inside." It was a simple invitation, yet it carried weight. For years, he had never welcomed anyone from the streets into his home. Outsiders were usually seen, not allowed, and certainly never treated as equals. But something about this boy, his courage, his honesty, his quiet strength, made Cabello do something unexpected. Tanashi froze for a moment, unsure if he had heard correctly. His life had been filled with people looking down on him, mocking him for being poor or orphaned, so a billionaire offering kindness felt strange, almost unbelievable. He glanced at the massive doors, the polished floors, and the shimmering chandeliers inside. The world beyond the gates looked like another planet. His heart pounded with fear and uncertainty. Could this be a trick? Would Cabello laugh at him, send him away, or worse, call him foolish for thinking he belonged in such a place? Yet, the thought of his grandmother, weak and suffering in their small hut, pushed him forward. He remembered the empty medicine bottles, the long nights of worrying, and the hope that someone, anyone, might help them. Tanashi took a deep breath, wiped his hands on his worn clothes, and nodded. "All right," he said softly, stepping past the threshold. Every footstep felt heavy, carrying the weight of both fear and hope. As they walked through the mansion, Tanashi kept his gaze low, careful not to touch anything, careful not to draw attention. Everything was so new, the polished floors, the sparkling chandeliers, the paintings on the walls. But he acted with respect. He didn't marvel, he didn't ask questions, he just followed Cabello, who watched him closely. The billionaire noticed how different Tanashi was from the people he usually met. There was no greed, no curiosity about wealth or luxury. The boy's mind was on his grandmother, on survival, and on doing the right thing. Cabello realized that this small decision, to invite Tanashi inside, might be the start of something important. It was more than just an act of generosity. It was a test of trust, a bridge between two worlds that rarely met. And as Tanashi moved cautiously through the grand halls, Cabello felt a strange sense of anticipation. For the first time in a long while, he was curious not about money or power, but about the life of a boy who had nothing yet carried so much courage and hope. As Cabello led Tanashi through the mansion, he couldn't help but notice how wide the boy's eyes had grown. Every corner seemed to amaze him. The sparkling chandeliers hanging from the ceilings, the soft, patterned carpets that covered the floors, and the grand staircases that spiraled upward like something from a storybook. Tanashi's gaze lingered on these luxuries, yet he didn't reach out to touch a single thing. His hands stayed to himself, his steps careful and respectful, as if he understood that these were not his possessions, and that admiring from afar was enough. Cabello felt a mix of pride and surprise. Many people who entered his home would have rushed to touch, to test, or even to criticize the wealth around them. But not Tanashi. The boy's humility struck him harder than any expensive artwork on the walls. There was no greed in his eyes, no envy, no desire to show off. He was simply present, focused on the task he had come to do and on the man who had invited him in. Every movement reflected discipline and respect, something Cabello had rarely seen outside of his business world. Finally, Tanashi spoke, his voice calm but steady. "Is there anything else you need fixed before I go?" he asked. Just like that, he reminded Cabello of why he had been invited in the first place, to help, not to marvel or beg. The simplicity of the question, coming from a boy who had never experienced wealth, carried more dignity than many adults Cabello had met in boardrooms filled with power and money. It was as if Tanashi's focus on doing good, even in a place so far from his own life, made everything else, money, status, pride, feel unimportant. Cabello couldn't look away. The contrast was so clear. A teenager, wearing worn clothes and standing on humble feet, holding respect and skill in his hands, moving through a palace without being tempted by its luxury. Every polished surface, every glittering chandelier, every soft carpet was a test of character, and Tanashi had passed without even trying. In that moment, Cabello realized that the boy's worth wasn't in his strength or intelligence alone. It was in his humility, his self-control, and his ability to remain grounded despite entering a world that could easily have overwhelmed him. The billionaire felt something stir inside him, a rare mix of admiration, guilt, and unexpected hope. Tanashi had shown him that true value doesn't come from wealth or possessions, but from character. And as the boy quietly waited for instruction, Cabello understood that he had just met someone who could change not only his life, but the way he saw the world forever. As Cabello watched Tanashi move carefully through the mansion, a sudden memory struck him like lightning. He saw himself as a small boy, wearing tattered clothes, walking barefoot on dusty streets, his stomach empty, and his heart heavy with worry. He remembered his mother, a woman who worked tirelessly to feed him, to keep him safe, and to give him a chance at a better life. Life had been hard, cruel even, and every day felt like a battle just to survive. For years, Cabello had buried those memories deep beneath his wealth, his power, and the walls of pride he had built around himself. Money had become his armor, luxury his shield, and success his mask. He had convinced himself that wealth erased the struggles of the past, that it made him untouchable, and that the boy he once was no longer mattered. But seeing Tanashi, so young yet so strong, so humble yet so capable, forced those old feelings to surface. Guilt hit him like a heavy wave. He realized that he had forgotten what it meant to be poor, what it felt like to fight for every coin, to care for a loved one without having enough to give, and to work tirelessly just to survive. Tanashi's situation mirrored his own beginnings in a way that made the billionaire uneasy. Here was a boy living the life he once had, facing hardships that money had eventually allowed him to escape. And yet, Tanashi carried it with dignity, strength, and courage. Qualities Cabello had taken years to develop, and often with a sense of bitterness or anger. The mansion suddenly felt different. The chandeliers seemed to glimmer not with wealth, but with reminders of the distance between who he had become and who he once was. The polished floors reflected more than his expensive shoes. They reflected the choices he had made, the walls he had built, and the selfishness he had embraced. For the first time in many years, he felt exposed, small, and deeply human. Cabello realized that money could not cover shame or erase empathy. Tanashi had awakened something in him that he thought was long gone. Awareness, compassion, and a longing to make things right. The guilt wasn't just about the boy outside. It was about every time he had turned away from someone in need, every time he had ignored the struggles of others, and every time he had let pride dictate his actions. In that moment, Cabello understood that the past he had hidden was still a part of him, and that the boy in front of him was a reflection of the man he once was, forcing him to face a truth he had long avoided. Cabello watched as Tanashi led the way through narrow dirt paths to a small, crumbling hut. The roof sagged in the middle, the walls were patched with bits of metal and wood, and the door barely hung on its hinges. Inside, Gogo Maruping, frail and tired, tried to sit up but winced in pain. The sight made Cabello's chest tighten. He had never realized how harsh life could be for someone like this boy, who carried so much responsibility at such a young age. Without hesitation, Cabello stepped in. He arranged for immediate medical care for Gogo, ensuring she would receive proper treatment for her illness. Doctors were called, medicine was brought, and slowly the old woman's strength began to return. While the medical team worked, Cabello turned his attention to the hut itself. He hired builders to repair the roof, fix the walls, and make the small home safe and comfortable. He wanted the boy to have a place where he didn't have to worry about rain leaking in or floors collapsing. Then Cabello looked at Tanashi's tools, worn and broken from years of hard work. He handed the boy a brand new set, pliers, hammers, wires, and everything a young craftsman could need. Tanashi held them in his hands, his fingers trembling. Tears began to fall, and he couldn't stop them. For the first time in his life, someone had not only noticed his efforts but also stepped in to make his life easier. The boy's emotions overflowed, not from embarrassment or pride, but from relief, gratitude, and the long-buried hope that someone might care. Cabello stayed with him as they watched the builders work, as the hut slowly transformed from a place of struggle into a home of safety and warmth. Tanashi's gratitude was quiet but powerful. He looked at Cabello with wide, honest eyes and said nothing, because words could not express everything he felt. Every tear, every small smile, every glance said it all. That someone had finally seen him and his grandmother, and for the first time they were not alone. As they left the site, Cabello felt something shift inside him. Helping Tanashi was not just an act of generosity, it was a turning point. The boy's life had changed forever, and in that act of kindness, Cabello began to understand the real meaning of giving back. It was not about money or status, but about seeing people, valuing them, and offering hope when it was needed most. Tanashi's tears were not just for the help he received, they were for the first spark of trust and love he had ever known from someone outside his small world. Watching Tanashi work and seeing how a little help could change his life completely, Cabello felt a powerful idea take root. He realized there were many children like Tanashi, talented, hardworking, but trapped by poverty and lack of opportunity. He wanted to do more than just help one boy. He wanted to create a chance for dozens, even hundreds, of kids to learn, grow, and reach their potential. That's when he decided to start a program called Makarori Youth Builders. The initiative was simple but powerful. Cabello wanted children from poor neighborhoods to receive training in metalwork, carpentry, and engineering, learning skills that could help them earn a living and build a better future. It wasn't charity, it was empowerment. He wanted to give them tools, education, and guidance so they could take control of their own destinies. He envisioned a generation of young people capable, confident, and self-reliant, just like Tanashi, but with the support they never had before. Tanashi became the first to join, and Cabello didn't just make him a participant, he made him the youngest supervisor. The boy's hands-on skill, his patience, and his natural ability to teach others made him perfect for the role. Despite his age, Tanashi guided other children, showing them how to handle tools, repair objects, and think creatively when faced with problems. He shared the lessons he had learned from struggle and self-reliance, and soon, the other kids looked up to him as a leader and a role model. The program quickly gained attention. Parents saw their children learning trades that could support their families, while the kids themselves felt pride in their new abilities. Each completed project, from repaired gates to wooden furniture, became a symbol of hope and achievement. Cabello watched as the young faces lit up with confidence, and he realized that this initiative was more rewarding than any business deal or investment he had ever made. Makarori Youth Builders didn't just change Tanashi's life, it changed Cabello's too. He learned that real success wasn't measured in wealth or titles, but in the impact he could make on others. Tanashi's courage and humility had inspired him to use his resources to create lasting change, turning a single act of kindness into a program that could shape an entire community. Together, they built more than skills. They built hope, pride, and a future that no storm or hardship could take away. Months had passed since Cabello had first met Tanashi, and the boy had grown in skill, confidence, and creativity. One bright morning, he unveiled a project that left everyone in awe. A brand new automated gate for Cabello's mansion. Unlike the old one, this gate was designed to be stronger, smarter, and more efficient. It opened with a smooth motion, responded to commands instantly, and looked elegant yet powerful. Every detail showed Tanashi's intelligence, patience, and the countless hours he had spent learning, practicing, and perfecting his craft. Cabello stood at the entrance, watching the gate in action. Pride swelled in his chest, but it wasn't the pride of wealth or ownership. It was something deeper, a mix of admiration and respect. He realized that this gate represented more than metal and mechanics. It was a symbol of perseverance, talent, and the potential that could rise from even the hardest circumstances. Tanashi had taken the lessons life had given him, paired them with the tools Cabello had provided, and created something remarkable. "Not every treasure comes in gold," Cabello said, his voice warm and full of meaning. "Some come in the form of a boy with a toolbox." He smiled, looking at Tanashi, who stood quietly, modest yet proud. The words carried the weight of truth. True value isn't always found in money, luxury, or status. Sometimes it is hidden in effort, skill, humility, and the courage to rise despite difficulties. Tanashi, with his determination and heart, had become a treasure in Cabello's life, teaching him lessons that no wealth could ever buy. The story didn't just end with a gate or a successful project. It ended with a transformation. Cabello had learned humility, understanding that giving back and recognizing talent in unexpected places could bring more fulfillment than any business victory. Tanashi had learned that hard work, honesty, and courage could open doors, sometimes literally, and that the kindness of one person could change a life forever. Neighbors, friends, and the staff of the mansion watched the new gate operate, unaware of the journey behind it. To them, it was simply a piece of technology, but to Cabello and Tanashi, it was a symbol of hope, growth, and the extraordinary bond between a billionaire and a boy who refused to give up. In the end, the story left a lasting message. True wealth is measured not by gold, but by the hearts we touch, the lives we change, and the humility we carry while doing so. Thanks for watching. Smash that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next amazing story.